Welcome back to another reaction. This one is from MMObyte, Mrs. Styx. She is the wife of the face of, I believe, what started MMObyte. And she has come into MMOs much, much later in life. So she has put out a post talking about starting MMOs for the first time as an adult. And she's a big 14 fan. And I look forward to seeing kind of what her thoughts are as she's gotten into the process of getting into these games more and more, but much later than many of us kind of caught that MMO bug.
Have you ever been so late to something that by the time you got there, you'd missed out on the best part? Yeah, that was me in roughly 2014, at the ripe age of 26 when I first discovered MMOs and, well, gaming. I'm not saying I hadn't gamed before then, but the amount of games I'd actually played were
26. I can't imagine going all the way through high school and college how different my time would have been had I not been playing games during that.
sparse at best. Today, I'm going to take you all on a little journey as we explore how it felt coming into MMOs in my late 20s, what specifically brought me to the genre, and how it felt diving into the world as an adult that was untouched by the world of MMOs. To give you a quick rundown of my history with video games, when I was around 10 years old, my family bought our first computer. I remember exploring the likes of Solitaire, Space Cadet Pinball, Oregon Trail, Commander Keen, and finding these were all very diverting things to partake in, but I'd always opted
That pinball game caused a lot of fights in my family. That pinball game right there, that exact one. This naturally led me to MMOs. So it's interesting to see that she had a very similar background in some of these exact games and didn't naturally jump that to large multiplayer ones. I'm sure she's not alone. It just is so different than me and the people that I've been surrounded by.
to go outside before choosing to game. Not always by choice, of course, as my parents restricted the time I was allotted to maybe 1 hour supervised every week. Flash forward to years later, my brother built me a PC to play Unreal Tournament 2004 with him. This was my first handshake with first-person shooters. From there, we exploded into Crisis, MechWarrior, and Unreal Tournament 3 as the years went on. It never dawned on me to really use my computer for anything other than like AIM or gaming with my brother on the weekends and maybe the occasional Sims. Because, you know, studies came first, and I never saw games, especially FPS games, as anything more than something you could randomly sign into and just go shoot at things briefly for. It wasn't magical, it wasn't pulling me into a world I could get lost in. Mechanically speaking, you simply dodge, aim, and shoot for most of them. Or at least that was the general gist of games back then. The aiming part was hard, and other than that, it's just about going in and destroying things. Yeah, you got a story, but it wasn't overly detailed or complex. The characters were just kinda there. Now, those games were fine, and I had my fun in them, but it wasn't until after I graduated from nursing school in 2012 that I found myself moving into a tiny city with a huge trauma hospital where I knew no one, that I finally saved up enough to get myself a laptop to watch movies on. This laptop brought me into a new world. After it led me to my obviously now ex, it went on to lead me to the one good thing that they brought into my life: MMOs. In 2014, I created an account on Star Wars The Old Republic, and as I hit play, the sound of the lightsaber powering on gave my heart a flutter. I loved Star Wars. I watched each movie with my dad while eating pizza with our little TV trays while he goofily smiled and pointed things out to me.
What a cool starting point. To start with a franchise that means a lot to you. I think that's probably a lot of people's first invitation to MMOs. MMOs are pretty daunting. A lot of times they have a high price point because they're either going to ask you for money constantly or they're going to ask you for a subscription or something like that. That's not true of all, but it's definitely common to the genre compared to a single player game, or it's more just purchase it from GameStop and you're done, was where it was historically done. And I think the best place is when you have that nostalgia. You know, Warcraft 3 was huge in my family. StarCraft was huge in my family. Me and my brothers played it a ton, and so Warcraft was that franchise. But I can see why Star Wars is appealing. I can see why Elder Scrolls Online probably catches a lot of first-time players who are huge Elder Scrolls fans and want to make that jump. I think it's really interesting to see what acts as that invitation. If it's not just like, hey, a friend asked me to do this. I know that when I first joined World of Warcraft, like, me and my brothers split the cost of the subscription with our allowance because we didn't have that big of an allowance, and that was a way of kind of paying that. I'm the oldest, and so relatively quickly I was off and into college and paying my own subscription. But when we first got started, there was only one computer in the house anyway, so there was no reason to have more than one subscription in our mind, because it's not like we could all log in at different times anyway. Of course, for those of you that know how account sharing works, that does cause a pain point in an MMO when you do split up, because you have to decide who gets to keep their character. My original 2004 character, I think I moved to my own account probably in 2005, and so my first 6 months or a year or whatever of MMO is technically not the character I refer to as my original character. My original character lives on one of my brother's accounts. But what an interesting introduction.
My heart has since then belonged to Han Solo. So for me, to be in this world, it was like the moon to the waves. The effects made my heart swell with something I hadn't felt in a while. Nostalgia. Just the tiniest occurrence, like the ability to choose my race, though admittedly some of the races were definitely locked from the world to which I so highly loved, was just amazing to me. I had the ability to edit the physical appearance of my characters just like The Sims and change their voices. I could make my fantasy Star Wars me. And there I was in all my imaginative glory, a Jedi. I gobbled the quest up faster than probably intended for an MMO. I created my own lightsaber, fought some Empire scum, and more importantly, explored. It pulled me in so fast, I think I lost my footing for a few days before coming up for air. The other players ran past me, and I discovered that I could wave at them. I could talk to them. And they were so helpful. It wasn't me versus them, it was me and them versus the world. Guilds were a thing too, a community of people who loved the game just like me and offered help whenever I needed it. I remember someone gave me a lightsaber that had a soft glow near the base and was in my favorite color, and I just sat there thinking this was the coolest moment ever.
I remember sitting on the bank in Orgrimmar selling fiery enchants because they had one of the coolest glows, selling enchants that the effect wasn't actually that helpful. These different, I think Beastmaster was one and Icy was one, and it was all about what glow it put on there. And so you were looking for these very, like, these ways to modify your weapon. As games get bigger and they continue to add more, it kind of takes away from the specialness of those early cosmetics. Mounts are hard to lust after the same way as back when there was only 6 or 7 mounts available, and seeing a mount that was different than what you normally saw was a big deal. I'm not saying that we should delete cosmetics to go back to that, but there is some fondness to memories of early games that just lack the feature depth that they get as they age.
It was so impactful that it still sticks with me to this day, and I still remember that person's in-game name. Relationships weren't limited to the actual humans playing the game though. Realizing you could create bonds, romance, or piss off characters that were roped into your story made it all just feel like I was reading a book or watching a fantastic, interactive movie that I could control. I actually cared about the NPCs in this world. Though what blew my mind even further, what they don't tell you about starting MMOs, is the difficulty that these types of games present. Before, where my choice of weaponry was limited to a small selection of guns that would either shoot bullets or rockets, I was now faced with so many skills I didn't think I had enough keys on my keyboard. Learning the ins and outs of these skills was necessary for me. I wanted to be the best Jedi I could be. I studied them, I arranged them in terms of damage dealt and put stuns and other grips and holds to another side so I'd remember what they were there for. At this juncture, I didn't realize I could change keybinds either. You'd think I already know that, but I didn't. The information overload that occurred to me when entering this MMO was beyond measure. The tutorials and guide points were important to me, and there were mechanics that needed to be followed. There was so much to do: dungeons, operations, aka raids, PvP, farming, crafting, and so much more, and I did them all. One late night, as I was sitting there discovering the other stories other classes had, I glanced up at the clock and realized it was 2 in the morning, and I had to wake up for work in less than 3 hours.
When I look at how much I studied in college and how much I found time to do things outside the dorm in college and how aggressive I was about MMOs at the time, I honestly don't know how the math shakes out to imply that I was getting anything resembling a reasonable amount of sleep.
Where had the time gone? So as I groggily labored my way through my 12-hour shift, I ached to be at home playing in this deep and wonderful world I'd found. But if there was this world, were there others? I felt inspired to seek out more worlds. I wanted to adventure as far as I could and see where it'd take me. And I'd been in Star Wars: The Old Republic for nearly 2 years at that point. As I filtered through a few MMOs, the likes of Rift, Riders of Icarus, and Terra crossed my plate, but something was missing with these. It's then I realized the games were kind of empty. The occasional person crossed my path, but I mainly did things by myself. It felt really lonely. I love these worlds, and I couldn't understand why there weren't that many people around to play with. I was left with this feeling as though the stories being told just lacked the depth and substance that I was now used to. Terra was probably the most filled of the three, and I did play it at the time to max level. I attribute it to introducing me to action combat, which is a whole other thing entirely, and the newfound joys of what I'd like to call the healer life. As I dodged around the monsters in the dungeons and raised people, I realized not only did I enjoy helping people in real life, I also enjoyed healing in games. Instead of watching my damage, I had to watch everyone else, and I could no longer really fail mechanics because if I died, they died. I realized that I had a purpose. I was important. It also introduced me to prepping for more difficult dungeons so I could keep everyone alive. This took so much more time and effort than any FPS game had taken me to prepare for. Before, it was boom, hit a button, and I was there in the scene shooting things, but now I needed to actually study to prepare. From there, it started to go downhill. I moved on to Revelation.
Prep is such a funny thing. When you have time to make the game a priority, prepping for content and then succeeding at that content is incredibly rewarding. The moment it crosses over the amount of time you have or are willing to spend on the game, it becomes something that you really resent. And so that's why sometimes an MMO doesn't change as much as the people who play it change, as much as their life is going through these priorities. But there is something really special about a time in your life, whenever it is, that you have a Saturday that nothing else is going on and you can just dive all the way in, and you can let as little of the real world get in your way as possible, and you can really let these worlds kind of fully immerse you. And that doesn't mean it doesn't have to be story. It can be trying to clear a dungeon challenge. It can be something with friends. It can be a jump puzzle. Whatever it is, there's something really special about an MMO's ability to kind of suck you in. It's easy to chase. It's easy to want to go back and redo these, but you don't know what times that it sucked you in are special until after they're over.
online, and even though it was a new game at the time, it died faster than I could have ever dreamed. I also felt lost in the world, and not in the fun kind of way. Citadel came and went for me too. Flashy new MMOs were releasing left and right, but none of them had that special thing, that spark that made me want to play until the wee hours of the morning. I spent some time searching for the next MMO hit, and little did I know, I hadn't even scraped the surface of what was out there. I managed to stumble upon Blade and Soul, where I fell in love at first sight, but it was a little too late. Yes, the story was decent, the combat was fast, but the game, once again, was an empty husk. Some of the dungeons I couldn't do because there was no one there, and when I asked where everyone was, they said at max level, but if they were all max level, who was going to play with me? At this time, both Styx and I were just good friends. We were looking for an MMO we shared mutual interest in and settled on Blade and Soul. The two of us proceeded to play the game, and we managed to still have fun, which made it special to me. Sadly, I ended up leaving after completing most of the content. I was doing what every MMOer does now. I was chasing the hype. I just didn't know what MMO to actually play. Which one had the most hype? Which one would be the best? I knew WoW existed, but I'd heard it was for nerdy losers that hid in their basements so much that I think I'd actually come to believe it. So I never bothered to touch it. It wasn't until my boyfriend...
Oh, WoW has so many reputations. When my wife and I were dating, I had just quit WoW in Pandaria, and I was playing Final Fantasy XIV. And she asked me while I was dating, about video games, because her and her roommates played video games together. They'd play like Halo and Lego Star Wars and a lot of like single player RPGs and things like that. But her fear was that they had come across guys that had ignored them for MMOs, specifically World of Warcraft. And so she asked, do you play a lot of games? And I said, yes, me and my brothers play a ton of games. We play a ton of video games. I spent most of the time that I was dating reminding her that I was a huge nerd. But at the time, I lived with guys that worked out a lot and mountain biked and played sand volleyball and went out dancing and all these things. And so I naturally got, I went and did those things with my roommates because those are my friends and I enjoyed that. And so when I said I played a lot of video games, I think she thought that I was just kind of downplaying how much I play. I think she thought like, oh yeah, he plays like Call of Duty or a football game one night a week. But no, I'm a giant nerd. She's like, in hindsight, you absolutely warned me. And I heavily underestimated how much of a nerd you are. Because left to my own devices, I will play video games for 10 hours straight. And she asked me while we were dating, you don't play World of Warcraft, right? But this was a girl that, like, I had waited 6 months to ask out on a date because we'd had classes together and I didn't want to ask a girl out that I shared a class with because that sounded awful. So I waited until we had a semester that we didn't have classes together. And I was like, no, I don't play World of Warcraft, which is true. Like, I had quit World of Warcraft. This was like on our second date or something like that. So I'm not going to be like, yeah, let's see if we can guarantee I won't get a third. Like, do you play World of Warcraft? No, I don't play that game. But like in my head, I'm like, Final Fantasy is the same thing. It's the same thing. Like, I pay a subscription to play a game an unhealthy amount. But no, it's not World of Warcraft. Like, if you're checking the balance sheet in my credit card statement, there is $15 leaving my account every month to play an MMO that can absolutely keep me up until 2 in the morning ignoring you. But it's not World of Warcraft. It says Square Enix, Final Fantasy XIV. Like, that's not World of Warcraft. And so years later, when I went to go back at the end of Legion to World of Warcraft, I said, yeah, I think I'm gonna I'm going to be playing WoW this week. And she said, oh, really? Do you play World of Warcraft? I feel like I'd asked you this. And I said, well, I used to. And some of my friends have been saying it's really good, and I'm going to go back to it. And so I picked up WoW back in Legion. And she was... At the time, she's like, well, that makes sense. Like, it's a good game. It sounds like the Final Fantasy thing. Like, a lot of her, like, blanket statements about what a WoW player is have changed. But as the weeks went on, and as I played WoW a lot, and as I talked about WoW a lot, she was like, you played this a lot back in the day, didn't you? And I was like, yeah. like so much. There are friends of mine that you know that we raided together. Like, so much. She said, how come you didn't mention this when we were first dating? I said, you made it very clear that you were not going to date a guy that played WoW. And you said, do you play WoW? And the answer is like, no, I don't currently play WoW. That reputation is out there. Final Fantasy, for some reason, doesn't have it. I think Final Fantasy is prone to just as many unhealthy play habits. But, like, when she comes home and somebody at work has played a game, it's never Final Fantasy. She meets somebody at work that's played Warhammer, which is not a huge community. She meets somebody at work that's played WoW, or plays some of the first-person shooters I play, or something like that, and she mentions it to me. It's never Final Fantasy. And so for some reason, Final Fantasy, for as big as it is, it's not so, like, outwardly talked about. And maybe that'll change as it gets to be really popular to talk about right now. It's never had a reputation with it for the amount of playtime that people playing it really might be spending.
Friend, now husband, forced me into it that my world again exploded in 2018 before Battle for Azeroth. As I sat there staring at the great many choices of characters, I felt that sense of excitement again, but begrudgingly so. I didn't want to play this ugly game. It looked like something out of my grandmother's basement, despite being told they had overhauled the character models. This was a joke. I was not going to like this. The first dungeon hit where this little creature was throwing food out of a pot and I was eating it for buffs that I realized this is really dumb. Why was I doing this? Star Wars had me at first lightsaber sound, and now I'm fighting a thing in a pot. What has my life become? Is this the most beloved MMO in the world? You have got to be kidding me. It wasn't until probably Pandaria that the game actually began to grow on me. It was fun. The story was interesting. I still didn't understand, though, why most of the amazing cutscenes had to take place outside of the game on YouTube. This was a different experience. All the while, I listened to my husband regaling me with stories of old, how he was so much better at this expansion and so on and so forth. Slowly but surely, the areas began to look better. The plot thickened. My purpose in the game became a little bit more clear to me. As I entered it,
the story's there. It's a feeling. It's a thing you're a part of. Which also means that when it's not there, you don't immediately notice its absence. It's something that's a feeling. It's a slow build of, why are we doing this? Final Fantasy story's right in your face. Like, literally, cutscene. This is important. You're the character. It's about you. This is a big deal. And so, like, it's really, really bite-sized. Like, is this story? Yeah. How do I know? It says story. It is the main story quest. It is the MSQ. Oh, so it's probably pretty main then. Probably pretty important. Would you say it's a quest series that's kind of the priority thing, the primary thing, and it's about the narrative experience, the main story quest? World of Warcraft is much, much more abstract. It's there when it's there, and you can definitely feel invested. But I think that's what makes WoW lore creators so impressive. People like Noble and even like Mad Season capturing that both the player side and the lore side, because it's not as on the surface. It's not right there where they reference it and I go, oh yeah, I knew that. Noble can tell me things in a video, or Bellular can tell me things in a video that I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. And they're like, oh, well, did you play back then? Yeah, like a whole lot. And so it's definitely something that takes some time. MMOs in general are really hard to just dip your toe into.
Into Battle for Azeroth after the expansion launched. After months of getting to max level to be there for it, I was thrilled to be there. The world, the people, and the ins and outs were interesting to me. I had no clue where I was going in most of the cities, or even how to get where I needed to be without the help of my husband. I was exploring again though in this new type of open world, and for the first time in a long time,
Pandaria was confusing. Like there was a lot to know.
I was genuinely excited to be there. I was flying, sailing, and riding anywhere I wanted to be, albeit I didn't know where. It was also introducing me to world v world fights. Masses of people would suddenly appear on my now upgraded computer, and it would strive to capture what was actually occurring on its screen as we fought back the horde. I remember yelling orders at my husband, directing our group where next to strike so we could get our dailies done. It wasn't until we completed everything that I sat back in my chair, exhausted and yet satisfied, did I realize this was exactly what I was searching for. That thrill, that depth, the discovery in battles, the complexities of learning new skills, besting someone in a fight and getting that sense of achievement when you run in to aid a fight and the tide suddenly turned in your faction's favor. But there I was again, at the peak of what I could do for the time in the game, and now left with a tiny hole in my heart, so we went and played the Horde. I'm glad I joined WoW when I did, but I hear people tell me stories of the fond memories from expansions past and their disappointment in the Battle for Azeroth expansion. I came a little too late to have experienced that, but I didn't care, and I don't care. The world was alive and full of things for me to do. And while I honed my skills as a healer, I learned new tips and tricks like actually doing more damage on top of healing. I learned how to use new keybinds because how I have my hands on the keyboard isn't traditional for gaming, I guess. I got myself a gaming mouse. I evolved as a gamer. I became better. Not great, but better. I did raids and progressed in PvP. The next step I was guided towards was Final Fantasy XIV in 2019, another game my husband loves. It looked cute and I could be a cat girl, so I was down. No one, I mean no one, prepared me for what was about to happen. Upon entering, I was slowly moving forward and I was frustrated with how few skills I had, and it was so patiently making me learn each and every one of them without throwing too many in my face all at once. Quite frankly, and I know this might upset a few people, I was bored. Leveling felt like torture to me, and we stepped away briefly. At the behest of my friends, we returned though. They'd played this game for years now, and I was new. They helped push me through and made it fun, and as I leveled, and the community was just so nice. And then something struck me. The story. Never in my life have I played a game where I was so moved to tears. Laughter, sure, but tears, no. As I watched a tiny potato lie limply, hot tears rolling down my cheeks until I finally burst into a full-blown cry on my husband's shoulder. This would happen again and again. It was like therapy for me. I mean, I already cried a lot after a hard day's work at the hospital, but this was a different type of cry. I was crying for the death of a fictional character, not a real person, but it felt just as real emotionally to me. It was then I realized that games could tell a story, wrap you into the story, capture you so deeply that you could literally feel exactly what you're
I think that this is the journey that I came to story. I think that there is this desire that because you don't have to, but you might look back and like the story about Final Fantasy, that you have to come in with story as your background. And you have to remember that if story is truly unique to this game, if story is not something that the genre guarantees as a promise, that it isn't weird that somebody who has played games in the genre before would come in for reasons other than story. It isn't weird that people would come in and want to see what the game does compared to the games that they have played. So I think that to discover the story later is a really logical thing. Unfortunately, as the new player experience, the story's really front and center. And it makes that opening playthrough really slow if you're coming from something where what you've grown attached to is end game content. You've grown attached to rotations and optimizing content and optimizing how much experience or currency you get per hour, and that's what you've come to find joy in. And while that game is no longer satisfying you in those ways, you'd like to give 14 a chance to reach out and do those things. And that is not at all, especially coming in after the fact. It is not a Realm Reborn anymore. We are in Shadowbringers. To be playing a Realm Reborn now is a very solo narrative-driven experience. There aren't a constant number of fate trains passing by as people need to level up their alts to get to cross-class skills like there were then. Many of the dungeons aren't things that you really have to respect nearly as much as you did then, because the way syncing works and the classes available and people's knowledge of the content, it is not uncommon in low-level dungeons to be able to clear them with only 3 of the people even at their keyboard. That means that you, for some portions of those dungeons, don't need a tank or a healer. It's not even like you can sit out a DPS. So to discover story later, I think is fair, and I think her storyline here of progressing through MMOs, as I played single-player games, and what I appreciate about it is this depth of my own character, not a narrative character, but my own character, where I get to focus on gear and cosmetics and my interactions with other players. And that building what made MMOs unique to her is something that I really relate to. That's something that MMOs offered, where I don't need MMOs to offer a better story than a movie can, or a book, or like, I don't need that. There are already forms of media in my life that do a good job at that. But what MMOs offered uniquely is a really special chance to interact with my character in a world where there's other characters in a way that Netflix can't do, that a single-player game can't do, that reading a book can't do. The only thing that comes comparable, in my opinion, as far as individual self-character development, not story development, my character, me, the only thing that compares to that are role-playing games. It's D&D, Pathfinder, a little bit of Warhammer, where I can talk a lot of trash about, the lore of my character and why that means I won a dice roll. And those are costly. They take a lot of time. They take being in person, because I've tried doing them digitally, and while it is possible, it is not the same. And, in some cases, they take a lot of money spent on books or figurines and things like that. And an MMO makes them available at this really affordable $15 a month to just hop in and be exposed to hundreds of thousands of other players any time of day that I want. And so they really are in a unique position in that way. And that's why I'm okay saying, even if the story is perfect, it can be something you discover later, if and when that's something that matters to you. You do not have to come into Final Fantasy XIV caring about the story. It's not going anywhere. You can go back later. They literally built a feature to make sure you could do that on your max level character if you wanted to.
Character should be feeling in that moment. From there, I did as everyone had instructed. I took my time, I explored, I made friends, and lost track of time. That's when Shadowbringers dropped. The symphony of feelings this expansion made me feel was unlike any I'd ever felt before from a game. It gave me courage and hope, and once we reached the end, I mustered up the courage to do something I'd never thought I'd do as a gamer. I attempted Savage Raids. I usually steered clear from more difficult content in MMOs because I felt this small feeling like I was bad at the whole MMOing thing, and I still do. These fights required such coordination, preparation, and dedication that I didn't think I could do it. I also thought I could do it alone until halfway through the second Savage fight I was introduced to Styx, aka raid groups. Time flew on. I accomplished one after another with different kind souls who took me under their wing. I went from gray parses to green and now blue, which is just slightly above average. I find solace in the fact that I'm average for less than half of the gaming population in Final Fantasy XIV that attempts Savage Raids. A personal accomplishment I will never forget. Since then, and along the way, I've come into more and more MMOs. Mainly what we'd refer to as dead ones, forgotten ones, old ones, obscure ones, new ones that are empty faster than a room that got farted in. Why didn't these ones thrive where other ones had? Maybe I was too late to them to enjoy them in their prime. Not a single one of them sparked that same flame I got from Star Wars: The Old Republic, WoW, or Final Fantasy XIV. I'm still seeking that same feeling from another MMO, and my heart is open and willing for it, as I'm sure many of you are as well. We're all ready for that game that makes your heart flutter again, makes you wonder what's next, makes you stay up until the early morning despite work or school the next day. I go back sometimes to Star Wars: The Old Republic, and it feels emptier than it had before. I think it's doing fine, but I still worry about it because I did love it. I walk around older MMOs and I don't see another soul the entire time I'm playing. I can't do dungeons, I can't do raids, and I can't PvP. I can't fall in love with an empty vessel. It seems of late we have
It's really hard for new games to break into the space for that reason. Hype is incredibly dangerous because hype can get people into raising their expectations well above anything that can be delivered. Saying that one of the upcoming MMOs is going to be the game to end all games puts a ton of pressure on it. But if you don't say that, why would we all hop in on day one? And if we don't hop in on day one, really interesting systems, such as the economy in EVE Online, such as, raid communities in WoW or 14, such as PvP in games like Guild Wars, they really can't thrive if there's not a critical mass, that core number of people. Once you're over that, everything in addition to that just makes it more fun. But there is a base number that makes these systems function. If they're not designed with that in mind, then they tend to break when lots of people come into it. And what makes them feel really special is that interaction. But that unfortunately means when they dip below whatever that critical number is, where you go to queue for a dungeon and there just isn't anybody. And you go to queue for PvP, and there just isn't anybody. Or you go to get matchmade against something in some game, and you get paired against the same person over and over and over. It makes those systems die. She's talked about 14 a fair bit. That's the game I play more than any other. And 14, its PvP struggles with that. Once it falls below that line, where your queue times get longer and you get paired against the same people more than one match in a row, you disengage. But as you disengage, it gets worse, and it spirals down. So I think that you do need a critical mass of people for MMOs. So it's hard to say, is a game bad because no one plays it? Or does no one play it because it's bad? We know which MMOs are struggling and which MMOs are succeeding, but it's not real clear which comes first, the community or the content.
a lot of MMOs coming out, and while some of them are fun, I can tell you now that they lack the depth that the older, more successful ones have, even if I played them for years after their release. Even the games I loved are squishing themselves down now to be less hefty in areas, to be faster, to cater to the new blood coming in. And in doing so, you lose something about them, I think. New games are fast, it's fluffy, and it's just not as good. I have high expectations now after my journey, and it's okay to play games to just have fun. But I look forward to that next hefty MMO that drops that has something amazing. I kind of wish I hadn't been late to the party, But I'm here now, and I'm so thankful for the journey I had, and I love hearing your stories of older MMOs we've now lost or are empty that you once loved. For now, while I wait, I'm starting a new journey that's slowly winning me over. Console games. Maybe if you guys want to hear that story, I can tell you my late to console games story too, as I'm attempting it for the first time as of 2019. Anyway, thank you all for listening to my late to the party story. This was Mrs. Styx signing off for now. Bye!
It's a beautiful video. MMObyte as a channel covers a huge number of MMOs. They have a heavy representation among like free-to-play games and a heavy investment in the big ones, such as World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy. It's interesting to hear. It's interesting to hear that hear her share that journey. I think there's a lot of people that come in and not doing something simply because people started it before you. That doesn't get better. You know, if you're late by 5 minutes and then you wait, now you're just late by 10 minutes. And so, you know, if you're gonna do it, just do it. It's what that saying is about fruit trees, right? The best time to plant one was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. There are people coming into MMOs, whether because they've done other things with their time or they're just young. There are people coming into MMOs for their first time every day. It can be incredibly frustrating. Brian and I just recorded a post for Work to Game on people being frustrated by people not wanting to improve at games, based around a Reddit post that was kind of venting on that. And there are people late. There are people just coming into Final Fantasy for the first time, just coming into World of Warcraft for the first time, just coming into MMOs, just coming into games for the first time. And it's happening today, and it will happen again tomorrow, and the day after that. It is not too late. It's not going anywhere. As a kid, my dad actually, my biological dad that I don't talk about a ton, actually worked as like a network and systems engineer. Actually worked in that field for Raytheon, a big, basically defense contractor here in the United States. And he told me as a kid that internets were just a fad and that games were just a fad. And I got my first gaming console, a Nintendo Entertainment System, the original Nintendo, and he told me to enjoy it because it was going to end. And when I got into middle school, he told me it would end. And when I got into high school, this is definitely it. You know, Microsoft is getting in the space with Xbox, and it's not going to succeed. You know, when we look to MMOs and stuff, it's hitting a critical mass. He could have been right. But I will say from this version of reality, it doesn't look like that's the case. It is quickly becoming billions of dollars. It is quickly becoming billions of players, depending on how you define gamer, all the way from people just getting into games on their phones to people diving in hardcore and losing all kinds of sleep to dive deep into the games that I spend a lot of my time playing and talking about. It's very cool to hear this journey. And it's a great reminder of why and how we got here. Many of us may have had this journey long ago. Many of us may have just be going through this journey now. But either way, it's memories to be cherished. You don't get to go into your first MMOs more than once. It's a special moment when you're in your first MMOs. And so it's something to be enjoyed and will be looked back on fondly. That feels like a parent telling you to enjoy high school because you don't get to do it again. And at the time you're like, no, a lot of this sucks. But you do. You look back really fondly. And I think that's, I don't know. It's what makes me sympathetic to WoW. A lot of people have been frustrated lately when I've been comparing WoW and 14, and when I'm reacting to a video that talks really fondly about 14, I feel this desire to protect WoW. When I watch a video that protects WoW, I feel like I can vent, because I don't want to be in a room where everybody's kicking WoW while they're down, because WoW is where a lot of these memories were for me. And it's hard to watch them struggle. Yeah. It was a neat conversation. I think it was more than just to talk about the gaming, more than just to talk about kind of the journey. It's just what MMOs mean to us and what gaming can just mean to us across the board, kind of.